Okay, now we have a new lesson called arrays. Arrays is a kind of pattern of objects that are arranged in rows and columns with no gaps. Like this example, we have donuts. They are arranged in columns. Columns are the ones go from up to down. We have here 4 columns, and the rows that go from left to right, we have 4 as well. If there's no gap, it's called array. If it has a gap, it's called a picture. Like here, we have 5 Barneys. There is a gap right here, so it's a picture. Here we have 8 bicycles. There's no gap, so it's an array. Next, we have write the number of rows and columns. We need to write them. We will count the columns. Columns are the one from up to down. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 columns. How many rows? 1 and 2. 2 rows. Next, we have birds. How many birds? How many columns? 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 columns. How many rows? We have 2. Next, we have puppies. How many puppies? We have 1 and 2. How many rows? 1 and 2 as well. Next, we have number of stars. Stars, we have how many columns? 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 columns. How many rows? 1, 2, 3, 3 rows. Next, we have circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 columns. Number of rows are 3. Next, we have a man. We have 1, 2, 3 columns and 1 row, only 1 row. Next, we have to write the number of the columns of rows and columns, as well as calculate the number of fish or the number of objects in this pictures, in this array. Sorry. Here we have triangles. We have 3 columns and 2 rows. In this column, we have 2 triangles, so we will write 2 and it's repeated 3 times, so we will repeat it for 3 times. As in rows, we have 3 triangles in every row and it is repeated 2 times. Okay, the array is column by the number of columns by the number of rows. We have 3 columns and 2 rows. Next, we have triangles. How many columns? We have stars. We have how many columns? 4 columns. How many rows? 2 rows. In this column, we have how many stars? We have 2. How many times? 4 times. We'll write it 4 times. In this row, we have how many stars? 4. How many times? It is repeated 2 times. The array is how many? We write the number of columns times the number of rows. We have 4 columns by 2. Next, we have watermelons. How many columns? 4 columns. How many rows? 1. In this row, we have how many watermelons? 4. In this column, how many watermelon? Only 1. How many times it is repeated? 4 times. We will repeat the number 4 times. The array is the number of columns times the rows, so it's 4 by 1. Next, we have popsicles. How many columns? It's 6. How many rows? It's 3. How many popsicles in the 1 column? We have 3. How many popsicles in this? It's 3. So 3. How many times written? 6 times. We'll write it 6 times. How many rows? We have 3 rows. How many popsicles in the same row? We have 6. Repeated how many times? 3 times. The array is how much? It's the number of columns by the number of rows. We have how many columns? 6. How many rows? 3. Hearts. Here we have 5 columns and 3 rows. In this column, in the first column, we have how many hearts? 3 hearts. Repeated how many times? 5 times. In this row, we have how many hearts? 5. Repeated how many times? 3. We'll repeat it 3 times. The array is the number of columns by the number of rows, 3. In the last question, we have arrays by additional sentence. Okay, the array here, we have but b's, yes. How many columns? 2. How many rows? We have 4 rows. Okay, the array is the number of columns by the number of rows, so it's 2 by 4. The addition sentence, in this column we have how many butterflies, how many bees? We have 4. Repeated how many times? 2. In this row we have how many column? In this row we have how many bees? 2. Repeated how many times? 4 times. In the next question, we have apples. How many columns? 4. How many rows? 3. And this, in the first column, we have how many apples? 3. Repeated how many times? 4 times. We'll write it 4 times. In this row, we have how many apples? 4. Repeated how many times? 3 times. In the next one, we have cupcakes. How many cupcakes in the first column? 3. How many rows? It's 4. The additioning sentence, in the first column, we have how many cupcakes? 4. Repeated how many times? 3 times. In the first row, we have how many cupcakes? 3. Repeated how many times? 4 times. We have the array and they want us to draw it and write the additional sentence. The first number, it is the number of columns, and the second number, it's the number of rows. As here, we will write the number of the columns. How many columns? 5. We will write 5 circles. Then by 2 rows, so it is repeated twice. We will write 2. Here we have 5 columns and 2 rows, so it's correct. Then in the first column, okay, we have how many circle? 2. Repeated how many times? 5. So we'll write it 5 times. Or we can write it in the other way, as in we have the first row has how many circles? 5. Repeated how many times? 2. We'll write it as 2. The next question, we have 6 by 1. 6 is the number of columns. 1 is the number of rows. Then we will draw 6 stars. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we will draw 6 stars by 1. We have كده 1 row and 6 columns. Additioning sentence. In the first column, we have how many stars? 6. 1. Repeated how many times? 6 times. In the first row, we have how many stars? 6. Repeated, not repeated. It's equal to 6. In the next question, 3 by 3. 3 is the number of columns. The other 3 is the number of rows. We will draw 3 circles by 3 in 3 rows. The first, second, third. The additioning sentence, in the first column, we have how many circles? 3. Repeated how many times? 3 times. And the equals to 12. In the second question, 9. And the second, and if we have rows, it has how many circles? 3. Repeated how many times? 3 as well. Next question, 3 by 2. 3 is the number of columns. 2 is the number of rows. We will draw as well circles. 3 columns. We will draw 3 circles. How many rows? 2 times. How many circles in the first row? 2. Repeated how many times? 3 times. In the first row, the other addition way, in the first row we have how many circles? 3. Repeated how many times? 2. The next one, 4 by 5. This number is columns. This number is row. How many number in the first column? We have 4. How many rows? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. The additioning sentence. In the first column, we have how many circles? 5. Repeated how many times? 4 times. In the first row, we have how many circles? 4. Repeated how many times? 5 times. Next question, 2 by 5. 2 is the number of columns. 4 is the number of rows. How many columns? 2. How many rows? 4. In the first column, we have how many circles? 4. Repeated how many times? 2. In the first row, we have how many circles? 2. Repeated how many times? 4. Okay, in the next question, we will color and form the array according to its name. Okay. The next page, we will color and form the array according to its name. Now we have the array name. It's 4 by 2. 4 is the number of columns. 2 is the number of rows. Okay, 4 circles. How many times? Repeated how many times? 2 times. Okay, in the first column, we have how many circles? 2. Repeated how many times? 4 times. In the first row, we have how many circles? 4. Repeated how many times? 2. Next, we have 3 by 3. We have 3 columns and 3 rows. Okay, we'll draw 3 circles, repeated 3 times. In the first column, we have how many circles? 3. Repeated how many times? 3 times. We'll write it 3 times. In the second row, in the first row, we have how many circles? 3. Repeated how many times? 3 times. Okay. 2 by 5. We have how many columns? 2. How many rows? 5. We will draw 2 columns. And then how many rows? 5. In the first column, we have how many circles? 5. Repeated how many times? 2. In the first row, we have how many circles? 2. Repeated how many times? 5 times.